And now for our panel, From the Core to the Edge to the Experience, moderated by Diane Myers of Infonetics.
Good morning. I want to thank GENBAND for inviting me to come and participate on this panel today. It's a perfect topic to kind of conclude what we heard this morning from Mark in particular. I have to thank Mark for teeing me up, right? He really did a great job of laying out the core, the edge, and the experience. And without further ado, I want to introduce the fellow panelists. So first, Andrew Allen, the Senior Staff Consultant at Verizon. Michael Golob, the Senior Vice President of Engineering and Technology at Frontier Communications. John McCready, Chief Strategy Officer at GENBAND. Sian Morgan, Senior Director of R&D and Engineering at Videotron. Dr. Vish Nandlall, the CTO of Ericsson North America. And last, Ian Simpson, Chief Technology Officer at BT DWP. Great. Before I get started, I actually want to do something a little different for this panel. If you have questions, please tweet them. I have my tablet here, and I am going to be monitoring Twitter, so please use the hashtag Perspectives13. So please, I'll look at it, I'll watch it as we're going along, and I'll enter your questions in with my own. So that's a great way, I think, because it's such a large room, and you have all those nice new Galaxy devices. So please, there's no excuses for not using Twitter and doing this. So let me just give myself a quick introduction of who I am, and then I'm going to ask each of the panelists to also introduce who they are in terms of what they're doing within each of their organizations. So I'm the principal analyst at Infonetics Research. Infonetics Research is over 20 years old, and we really focus on communications technology and services within the enterprise and within the service provider networks. I've actually been in the voice over IP world for over 10 years now. I can remember looking at Vonage, when they first started here in North America, and I've been in it. I've worked for vendors, I've worked for different analyst firms, so I have a real passion around voice over IP, and particularly hosted services. Okay, so that's kind of a little bit about my background, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists, and we'll start with Andrew first.
Yeah, sure, thank you. It's working? Andrew Allen, I'm with Verizon, the Verizon Multimedia Services Organization in the engineering department. Most of my time has been spent, I'm actually responsible for the Fios Digital Voice data centers across the country on the consumer side. Spent a lot of time working on the TDM to IP business model, working with GENBAND as a partner to try to get that model feasible. In addition to that, I'm also responsible for all switching in the New York City metro area. And most recently, one of my biggest projects was actually working on the recovery for Hurricane Sandy.
Michael Golob, I'm the Senior Vice President for Frontier Communications. We operate in 27 states, primarily focused on rural markets across the country. I'm responsible for all the engineering and technology within Frontier, plus our 24-hour operations centers that we have.
So I'm Sian Morgan. I'm a Senior Director at Videotron. Maybe you don't know us. We're an MSO that covers the province of Quebec in Canada. So we were a triple play operator with internet, TV, fixed line phone, and now we're a quad play. So a message for Manal, who presented before. We're an MSO that did launch our own 3G mobile operations in 2010, and it's working very well. So that was a big transformation right there. And then on top of that, we've undergone a bunch of transformations, looking ATM to MPLS. We're in the middle of a SONET to IP program, a lot of obsolescence that we're managing. We've also had, got our fingers dirty in a bunch of IP services, et cetera. So a lot of stuff on the plate.
Hi, I'm Ian Simpson. I'm probably the only foreigner on the group here, and I'm used to the rain. And the Americans seem to talk about the rain a lot more than the British do, which is unusual. So I'm from British Telecom in the UK. I'm CTO on one of our major accounts, which is the Department of Work and Pensions, which they pay the social security in the UK. Fairly large organisation, 1,000 sites, 120,000 employees. They pay about £174 billion in benefits a year. And the main reason I'm here really is to talk through the transformation journey we've taken them on over the last 10 years. They had a kind of pretty disparate sort of WAN environment, voice environment, contact center environment, and we've kind of created a single centralized platform that takes 3.4 million calls per day, really. Some of it went well, some of it didn't, and really just want to share some of that experience, really. Thank you.
Great. Vish Nandlall. I'm the CTO and head of strategy for Ericsson in North America. Been in the industry for about 20 years now, largely as a technology tourist. So I've been in optical, wireless applications, and I guess I've been nominated or volunteered to talk about IMS today, so I'm looking forward to that.
John McCready. I'm just actually changing roles at GENBAND. The program lists my new function, but I'm really here on the panel in my previous role, where I was heading up the product management organization for some of our product lines. And I think the perspective that Vish and I would have as vendors, maybe slightly different than the carriers, is that the carriers face a daunting challenge with transformation. Ian and Andrew and Michael, Sean have talked about. The challenge as a vendor, of course, is that we're trying to serve all of you. And your situations are all different and unique, and you're coming from a different place, maybe trying to get to a different place. Your competitive environment's different. What your customers, are looking for is different. So our challenge is to try to bring forward, products and solutions that give you that pragmatic evolution, regardless of what you're starting from and what your environment is.
Great, great. So, your telecommunications networks, and I think we had the speakers this morning, particularly Chuck. And you talked about decades-old networks, right? And in many cases, operators have really cobbled together generations of products and technologies and protocols, and that has really created a challenge for a lot of operators today, worldwide, right? This is not just a one-region situation. In addition, we've seen the user demands really evolve. Right? Think about the connected car demo, video we saw, right? I mean, that's a lot different than when I grew up, when I still had a black phone, a rotary phone in my house. So today we're going to talk about how do service providers evolve? How do they transform their network? What our operators are doing today? What can they do, right? So we're going to start with the core, and then we're going to talk a little about the edge, and then we're going to talk about the experience. And so the first question I have for the panel is really around, where are your companies in their network transformation journey, particularly the operators, but I think even get some perspective from the the two vendors on our panel here to see how does that work. And I'm going to mix it up again a little bit. So we'll start with Ian first a little bit in terms of how do you see for yourself the networks transforming, whether it be for your group or just even the larger BT.
I think if you look at the customer transformation journey we took the DWP on. We very much had a kind of structured approach of dealing with the wide area network first, and sort of driving a standard converged voice over IP network, and we got that up and running over 1,000 sites. And I think it was really important that we dealt with the legacy TDM fragmented network and brought it into one place, and then built our services on top of that. Both into voice and into the contact center, and now starting to drive business transformation with our customer. And we'll follow a journey into SIP, et cetera, along that way.
Right, but at the same time, still keeping your old network standing too, right? So you're really running multiple networks in parallel.
Yeah, we are, and I think the customer, in terms of the DWP, and I don't know, people may have heard of welfare reform, universal credit, You know, they're going through a phenomenal business transformation in the UK, probably the biggest since the Second World War, and trying to keep the platforms with the lights on whilst they're going through that big change is a challenge for us.
Right, right. Michael, maybe you can give some perspective on Frontier.
Okay, the Frontier just went through a major transformation. We grew, 3 times our size with the acquisition we did of the Verizon properties in 14 states. So as we have gotten through that and consolidate all the back office systems, and now we're really trying to focus on the network. Also part of that agreement for that acquisition was that we would build out broadband to 85% of all the households in those markets that we acquired. So as I look at the network, it's really that broadband transformation. We agreed to do that. We signed up to that. And that's really the foundation that we're trying to build, our IP Ethernet network. As we've gone through that, we've also deployed voice over IP over that particular network, primarily to serve business customers. We haven't really focused on residential customers at this point. We've built this overlay network in place within the end game in mind of going back and picking up those residential customers. So right now, the conference has been interesting for me because I'm trying to really gather some intelligence on how other people have done this, what the possibilities are out there to do this economically for ourselves, how to leverage every other investment that we've put in the network, whether that was an investment to build Ethernet to fiber to the cell sites, or as I said, some IP DSLAM migrations. So we're really poised now. We swallowed the acquisition. We're at a point where we probably have every vendor that was ever manufactured some ways in our network out there. So it's the consolidation of that and looking really how to take the next step forward.
So you're really the pinnacle of the challenge, right? All the networks, all the equipment vendors. Your Class 5 network isn't going away anytime soon.
Right. So I've got this huge matrix that I keep up by my desk of all the vendors and capabilities and really trying to weave that together to say, how do I keep the network running? I think, the focus is how do you take care of customers, make sure that you don't have any major problems, or outages or anything related to your customers as you're trying to move your network forward at the same time. And the skill sets of the people, they're different skill sets. That we're running the more legacy network versus the IP network. And there was a lot of conversation this morning about, applications, and that whole group of folks that have to run those applications are not something traditionally we had necessarily in the telecom business.
Right. So Andrew, from your perspective at Verizon, how do you, and maybe this would be a good point for you to share that you've kind of done some network transformation, and maybe the weather, Sandy, helped you along, maybe quicker than you were on that path, but maybe you can share some of that.
Sure. And I guess I think Tony Malone kind of touched on this a little bit yesterday. Our 4 major strategic areas. So I'll just talk about the Fios Digital Voice product first. So we've seen great success in migrating a lot of our existing, let's call it TDM customers, onto the Fios Digital Voice platform. But we realize that not everyone's going to, in areas that we offer it, we do a very good job at migrating the customers, but you're still going to have your larger majority that are going to be left behind on the legacy products. So one of our biggest challenges is to see how we can accelerate migrating those customers onto, Fios Digital Voice, our Fios Digital Voice product. With respect to Sandy, I mean, it was a great tragedy, but out of that, we've learned so much from Verizon's perspective on how we can deploy voice over IP a lot faster, how we can use VoIP or kind of push the gateways out to the customer premise so that we can support all fiber solutions back to the central office. So we've only kind of scratched the surface on what we've learned. But what we plan to do is go back to what we've learned from Sandy and use what we've learned to see what we can do to collapse TDM, go from TDM to IP a lot faster, a lot cheaper, more feasible. And one of the key things, I think, in transformation, especially just being Verizon is that we have to make sure that we do it that it's reliable, that when we migrate our customers, that we do it in a responsible way, that the platforms that we migrate onto are reliable and they're sustainable. So, I'm really excited about the opportunities that I think we're going to have in transforming the TDM network into the VoIP network, not only for with the Fios product, but just with everyone else who's kind of left behind on the legacy TDM product as well.
Right. Yeah. So really now a strategy about really encouraging customers to make the choice to move to Fios versus doing the choice for them.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, and that's a valid strategy that other operators. One other question on you, though, in terms of this network transformation, we heard a little bit of it yesterday, and I hear it a lot. I was in Europe last week and talking to some operators where really trying to collapse the core into one network, right? And I know Verizon has a network for business services, right? So you have a business VoIP, and now you have the Fios.
Right.
And you'll have voice over LTE at some point on the wireless side. Those are still very separate networks, right?
Yes, they are.
And is there a thought, or in terms of vision, in terms of can you have a single core, even with just set the VoLTE aside, right? Just look at the wireline.
Yeah, I'm not
right?
VoLTE aside, and then there's IMS and
Right.
things that are coming in the future
Yeah.
that I think will bring a lot of that together. I think what we've done on the Verizon side, realizing that the enterprise space, it's a different type of customer than the consumer space, and I think for a little bit of time we're still going to have separate networks, but what we've really done, I guess, organizationally is kind of brought all that under one umbrella, so that even though we do have separate networks, we're taking advantage of the processes or the best practices from both. So we see a lot of cost savings in that. I mean, GENBAND might not like to hear this, but also the cost savings as far as negotiating contracts across the board not only between the business unit and the consumer, but wireless as well.
Right.
So I think in the near future, we're still going to have separate networks, but what we're doing is we're putting processes, and organizationally we're structuring ourselves to take advantage of best practices and processes in place where we can be very efficient and streamlined.
Right. So Sian has a little bit of a different perspective because she comes from the cable operator, so she's our cable representative, and you don't necessarily have all that legacy voice, right? So how do you view the evolution of your core network?
It's tough. It's easy to put it on chartware and say that everything's going to combine, and then in the real world, there are operational constraints and technology constraints. As you mentioned before, there are different drivers for the different networks, so I'm not always sure it's a good idea to consolidate everything either. In terms of IMS, we see obviously all the standards going there. It's a really, really hard business case, and I think luckily maybe there is a killer application, which is voice over LTE, but on the fixed line side, we don't see a huge driver to go that way right now. So we're really looking for the mobile side to pull that in for us, and then see what kind of gains we can get in terms of the fixed line services for the evolution.
Right. So Vish and John, because you have a little bit of a different perspective because you're dealing with many different operators, right? I mean, are you seeing operators that are collapsing, right? So this panel here is very separate, right? They have very separate core networks across different maybe businesses and network areas. I don't know if you have some examples of where you see some successes for operators that are maybe combining and consolidating that you might be able to share.
Can we go first?
Sure.
So actually, the best example I can think of is actually British Telecom with their Eston network, and the reason why I think that's rolling well and is successful is they effectively chose to build the new target architecture and grow that and let traffic come on it in sort of a natural evolutionary way. So again, it follows this pattern of a pragmatic evolution. You're not trying to force customers, you're not trying to make them feel a change, but at the same time, you're getting the modernized network. So take it step by step. It's a long game. You can't, unfortunately, be in a hurry. But by doing it in an organized way, you get a chance to collapse a bunch of disparate networks to a single one.
Yeah, I have a similar rationalization. I think, one of the existential threats that we've got in the industry is simply that, the the networks and the demand has shifted from one of scale and robustness to choice and flexibility. And so this notion of collapsing things so that I can create platforms is, I think, a shared notion amongst most of the operators. I think what's been lacking, and I think there's much evidence of this across the history of telecom, is that in and of itself doesn't create a platform, right? A platform can't be shaped around a technology. IMS is a technology, and some of the failures around IMS have substantially been that we didn't make it a platform, and to that end, you need to have retailing in terms of what the distribution looks like, what the discovery looks like. You need to have some form of being able to monetize it, and whether it's just a subscription model or some other type of model where you're employing a different currency, it needs to be evident, it needs to be structured. You need to have ecosystems around it, and I think that primarily is what a lot of operators are trying to achieve. It's taking a look at how do I extend that ecosystem against my primary platforms, and the notion of consolidating them and making them available to those constituencies is, I think, the real challenge that's being undertaken.
Right. So the next question, because I want to have an IMS question on the panel, and we didn't hear IMS in terms of a core strategy for any of you. Chuck, this morning from AT&T Labs, I mean, that's a very big part of their strategy, right? That's a big part of their network transformation. So I'm curious, for the operators on the panel, but then we'll also get the opinion of, Ericsson and GENBAND in terms of, is IMS part of the strategy? So I don't know who wants to tackle that first. No.
I can start. So, I would say I've been watching this for 4 or 5 years, and I still don't know if it's part of our strategy or not, truthfully, at this point. I think that what we've got to be able to see is the ability, we know that the TDM network needs to go away. And so I think we're really focused on that first, and some of the, I would say, the basic applications and the basic capability of reliability, redundancy that our customers expect today. And just going back to Sandy and the storm, we were impacted by that also quite a bit. And that local exchange, being able to keep up and the power out and still being able to make phone calls in rural America, it's pretty darn important. So how do we make sure that we have that capability at the same time being able to add those rich applications that were talked about in some of the prior presentations? I saw the car driving around, but in my mind I see a tractor or a combine out in the field, and how am I enabling that? So the guy knows, okay, sell my my soybeans today because the spot price hit a certain point, and that's what I'm looking for. So how do I take these cool concepts and integrate them into the customer demands that I have? And we don't have the mobile piece right now. We have a partnership for that. So it's a huge investment, and it's kind of at a tipping point where we're going to have to decide either to play or not to play. We haven't made that decision yet, but it's right around the corner. So I guess it's a long way of saying I don't really know.
That's a valid answer. Andrew?
Yeah, and I guess we're on the other side of the spectrum, and I don't think it's a secret that IMS is a very big part of Verizon's strategy. And as you mentioned before, we have many different networks, enterprise, we have consumer, wholesale, as well as wireless, and it's kind of the natural evolution to go to IMS so that we can get this convergence, be able to take advantage of rich applications, and deploy those even faster than we do today. Mm-hmm. So absolutely IMS, and we've invested a lot already into the IMS platform. I think Tony spoke a little bit yesterday about what the plans are, and it's something that we're really excited about. We think it's going to solve a lot of problems and create a lot of new opportunities for us.
But at least for Verizon, the first driver really being on the wireless side for VoLTE, in terms of IMS,
right.
Bringing it and driving
Correct.
it. Yeah. So Sean?
I think, our key strategies really are 99.999% reliability and robustness in the network. That's our number one thing. So if IMS can help us to get there cheaper, better, well, that's great. And our next, equally important strategy is 99 or 98% customer satisfaction. So we're really focused on those two things, and it's not always clear whether IMS is the best way to get there. Like I said, with voice over LTE, perhaps that is the killer application. And the trigger, especially on the fixed side, is probably not going to be some great new fantastic service. It's probably linked to obsolescence, reducing capital expenditure, equipment renewal, and things like that. So that's the way we see things looking right now.
Right. Ian, I don't know if you have an opinion on IMS or not.
I think I simply don't really know. I guess certainly doesn't really apply to my customer in terms of the DWP, but you know, BT don't really have a mobile arm now, and you know, I think probably some other of my colleagues around were better placed to answer it, but within my business, I just see lots of discussion around kind of IP Connect, Ethernet Connect, and there isn't a lot of discussion around that area. So probably not the right person to answer the question, if the truth be known.
Right,
So.
right. John?
Yeah, sure. So again, I go back to what I said at the beginning. The challenge as a vendor is, of course, everybody's sitting in a different position and has a different view. And so our challenge is to provide solutions that are relevant, independent of IMS, and they're equally relevant with or without it, or whether a carrier is planning to evolve at some point, and ensure that when they invest with GENBAND, that we're providing a solution that is going to fit their network today and also in the future. And in many cases, the carrier doesn't know if and when they're going to drive IMS, but very much need to make sure that investments they're making today are still going to be relevant should they make that decision. And so we can't count on IMS being there. At the same time, we want to be functioning and equally relevant in both cases.
Right. So Vish, Ericsson has a lot of IMS deployments around the world. But do you really think that the wireless, the voice over LTE, is really that's the driver, right? That's what gets it deployed. That's what drives the convergence, is the pull from the wireless side.
Yeah, I think the immediate urgency is around being able to provide voice parity over an LTE connection, which obviously through standards didn't organically emerge as it did with HSPA and GSM, as a for instance. But I think at the end of the day, if the intent is to replace a $2 trillion industry, global industry, with IMS, I think that might be fraught with some amount of peril. I think the issue here is that voice services are in the decline, and it's potentially not so much that the industry itself is in decline, because I think in general most industries are on the rise. It's how we're thinking about the industries that are on the decline. And what we really need to do purposefully with IMS is to make sure that we're actually trying to create the types of platforms and ecosystems that'll create new revenue for the operators. And I would submit that just providing subscription voice services is one way of doing that, but actually creating a platform where those voice services can be consumed indirectly through a CRM tool, in an IVR system, and be integrated through APIs, maybe yet another way. And I think that we're seeing different operators progress at different paces in terms of how they want to apply IMS. And when I say IMS, by the way, I don't mean dyed-in-the-wool IMS, but I think we're kind of long past that point. I've been in the industry when I worked with Verizon on advances to IMS, with AT&T on USB. They all have their different vocabulary to describe it, but fundamentally they're looking at creating a platform that in Clayton Christensen's term is not the quarter-inch drill, but the quarter-inch hole, right? So I think it's really interesting the way different operators are taking those into their systems, and based on their business strategies, adapting it and modulating it so that they can achieve a different outcome.
Right. So let me ask a little bit of a provocative question. We think about, since most of you have fixed line, or you all have fixed line networks on the operator side, is there still value in the fixed line, right? In terms of, do we even invest in the transformation? The world is going mobile, right? We've had lots of great videos and demos, and we think about how young people communicate today. It's through social media, maybe in WebRTC in the future, as we've heard. It's the mobile devices, it's the tablets. Is it even in the interest of the operator to be investing in a transformation and investing in the fixed line network? And maybe Sean, I'll start with you.
Sure. We actually believe it or not, are actually still seeing growth in our fixed line network. So we might be one of the few that still see that, I don't know. It's slowing growth. It's one of our most profitable services. It's our service with our highest customer satisfaction percentage. So yes, there's still value for us today, but it's true that when we come to be investing in the future, we see more and more cord cutting in our own network. We see, we can see the future, and so when we come to choose our investment dollars, they're more likely to go in the more emerging services and television and wireless, et cetera. So great now, very valuable today, but for investment in the future, I think we'll probably be looking at the other services that we have.
Well, Michael, I know you don't have a wireless arm, so obviously fixed is still pretty important to you, but maybe you can, you touched on it a little bit in your previous answer about, how you look at that, but, how does someone like a Frontier really move forward when so many of your customers are leaving to the wireless side?
Yeah, so I think, we've done a partnership in wireless now to try to pick up that particular customer segment, but I think, for us, if we build a good foundation network, the applications that we put over that network, including the voice application, will serve our customers well. And so I think, we're all in different stages of growth in our companies, and we right now are kind of finishing up solving that problem and trying to move on to the next issue. So we will find other types of revenue, because we know that voice revenue, unless we, miraculously figure out a way to make more out of the wireless, that ship has kind of sailed for us. So what we're really focused on is other types of services that we can provide to customers to make up some of that loss in revenue that we see coming off of the voice lines. But at the same time, voice is not going to go away. So how do we, continue to play in that space is the critical thing that we have to solve. And your question to IMS, if it could help us solve that problem, then we're going to probably take a very serious look at that. But we're also trying to grow our business in many other different ways besides the voice side.
Mm-hmm. So Ian, you have a little bit of a different perspective, because BT also does not have the wireless side, but you're also dealing with an enterprise client, right? And kind of, and even enterprises, right? We hear a lot of small businesses, they want to be mobile, right? They want to be able to, take services on the go. And how do you work to address that and keep your fixed line services still relevant to them?
I think the interesting thing for BT on the DWP account, say we've built, a large contact center, a large GENBAND voice platform, and really is how do we start helping our customer around their transformation, and part of that is helping the customer be more self-sufficient, helping them move into the web channel, into a multi-channel environment, which actually, in some respects, takes us away from some of the core revenue streams from BT. But building on that platform and trying to get that right avoidable contact strategy for them is something that we think is really important for the customer. And as a result of that, we've built trust with that customer, and we're starting to get much more business transformation with a large 1,000 sites, 3 million call plus a day customer. But it's all around multi-channel, digital by default, and moving into that business layer from the traditional telephony provider that BT is seen to be in a number of other areas.
Right.
I don't know if that answers the question.
It does.
It's a slightly
Yeah,
different perspective, and I think
Yep.
the key for me is I'm here to talk about our experience with that particular customer, and kind of having a stable platform, whether that be the network, the voice, the contact center, has really allowed us to move up that value chain and start driving what I'd call business transformation. Getting into their back-end systems and using that contact to save some fairly significant costs to our customer.
Right. So I want to move on to more the edge and the experience. But first I had a question that came in, and it's for Andrew. And it says, what do IMS vendors need to do to better ease implementation pains?
Well, I think they're doing it now. I think and I've heard a lot of this during the course of the last 2 days, is that we can't just view them as vendors. We really have to view them as partners. So we're really embracing that, and we're bringing them into the fold, let's say, to get in on development early, do joint testing, things of that nature, so that we can resolve any of the, let's say, OSS issues that we have, or just get the deployment, of the infrastructure that we need out there a lot faster than before, and make sure that the quality in not only the equipment that we're getting from our vendors and suppliers are good, but not only in the equipment, but also the software that supports the IMS core product as a whole. So I think it's really the partnership, and I think that's really what's changed over the last few years, which makes us really optimistic that when the product does launch, it's going to be a really good product. Right.
No one would accuse IMS as being easy, right? So, a question for Vish and for John. Vish, I'll have you start. As the network edge becomes a little bit more diverse, because we do have this proliferation of devices, what can service providers do to really help normalize and mediate that edge of the network?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the limitations that we've had as a telecom industry in trying to get these applications factories is that we've limited ourselves to the pool of developers. There's about 500,000, let's say, SOAP XML developers out there, and you can throw in the ParlayX developers as well, and you're trying to mediate through them somewhere around, let's say, back in the early parts of the 2000s, about 1 billion, clients, let's say. Today, when we're going to a realm where I can have up to 5 billion, 7 billion connected users, the numbers game doesn't shake out. Right? You need to have access to a pool of developers that are more around the size of 5 million, 10 million. And that really means that you have to play the web game. Right? And that's why this notion of moving away from what I'll call the industry languages towards more open standard languages that are RESTful based, that actually use JavaScript and JSON type notations that speaks the language of what the global community is using. That type of mediation is more important. When you have 5 million developers mediating 5 or 7 billion connected devices, the value of each developer goes up 20 or 50 fold, right? And so I think as we kind of look at how do you take a look at all those different devices and try to create really an experience that can be common across each of them, that isn't requiring you to reinvent that application every time you try to connect. I think that's really important, and we need to start taking a look at how do I augment these basic platforms, with capability to speak different languages. A great example is what Ericsson is doing, is we've created a WebRTC gateway that surrounds our IMS platform. And that in turn allows you to mediate something directly native from the browser, connect it into this IMS core that speaks SIP, but still have a number of different application developers see it as an open web-based platform. I think that those types of things are very key.
Right.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's one of the biggest opportunities is as we open up to the bigger developer community, the opportunity to get much more finely segmented applications, specific industry verticals or specific consumers, specific demographics, and those are all opportunities of capturing that long tail. For the carriers to become closer to their customers, more relevant to their customers, in addition to voice. I would still argue, though, that voice is the killer app. And so, what the end user needs is they need to consume voice and other applications in a seamless way that they don't know whether they're on the LTE network or the Wi-Fi network or a fixed network. All those things are completely transparent to them. And the carriers then are able to deliver things so that they've got that fundamental platform to deliver the service with security, with reliability, with consistent context, regardless of how the end user is consuming them. And I think, going back to the question about the fixed line network, I would argue Wi-Fi is really, in a way, part of the fixed network, and that still provides a great opportunity for the carriers to, get at their customers and provide that, ubiquitous and seamless service.
I just wanted to piggyback on I think what you said is great. I mean, voice as an application that's enhancing the user experience, and I think voice will never be the same. We'll all agree with that, right? And we can't think of voice as its own island like we used to years ago, because, as you said, a lot of the younger demographic, they're just not using it in the same way. So we have to find new creative ways of making voice that new killer app again, by combining it with other types of applications or services that are really enhancing the user experience. So I absolutely agree. Voice is not going away, at least from my perspective, and I just think we have to be really creative on how to see what, what's the value statement for the users going forward for the voice product as an application.
Yeah, that's a great segue to talk about the experience and kind of wrap this up around, the user experience. And you say voice is just one piece, right? And you can potentially wrap other pieces around that. And some of the over-the-top providers have done that, right? In a nice, simple application, right? There's lots of examples around there. So from a carrier perspective, since you brought it up, I'll start with you, Andrew. But what are the other wrappers that you would put around voice that makes it a really interesting experience that says, me as a user, I want to work with Verizon instead of pulling down an app to my tablet or my smartphone.
Right. And I think Verizon has a great opportunity just because, and I'll just use Fios again, the Fios product as an example. I mean, we've been able to do very creative things with kind of wrapping voice around video and even data. So that's some of the things that we're probably going to continue to do, and we probably don't even realize some of the newer applications or new ways in which we can use voice, with the Fios experience or even in wireless to kind of enhance that user experience. So I think we're doing it today. I mean, just as simple as you watching TV and being able to see your mother-in-law's number come up, and you can either answer it or not, or So I mean, these are some of the things that are going to enhance it. But I think, from my perspective, we need to understand, since the younger demographic is such a huge part of what we have to build for, is what's important to them, and what features can voice bring to along with texting and social media. And a great thing about social media is that there's so much information out there about user experience and really the emotions that the users have around using our products. So I think we need to take advantage of that as well.
Right. Sean, on the, you mentioned that for Videotron, your voice business is still growing, right? And so that's a positive. But if you look out, is this still focusing on the user experience and what you wrap around the voice, something that's part of the discussion, as part of the planning, part of the thought process for you?
I think voice is just one very small part of the whole series of applications and content. We are, and I see it in the presentations with AT&T and Verizon, our relationship with our customers is much, much deeper than any of the over-the-top providers. We have a personal contact over the phone, on the email. We are an entertainment provider in the home, a communications provider in the home, and we saw with AT&T, it reaches out into your car as well. So the relationship is much deeper. Voice is one very small part of that, but we need to consider all the services as a whole, with our customers.
Do you feel that the competition is changing, that it is over the top versus maybe the incumbent carriers in Canada?
I think over the top is definitely there, and different operators, different carriers are treating it in different ways, but it's part of the experience. Over the top is part of the experience for our customers. That's the way I see it personally. And we, like I said, we provide much, much more. And so I'm not really sure we should see it as a competitor anymore, but as part of the experience that we're delivering to our customers.
Yeah. And Ian, because you come more from the enterprise side, right? And enterprises have different requirements than residential consumers, but what can you do, right, in terms of offering a richer business service, right, for enterprises around voice or contact center or unified communications? How does that start to play into creating a more rich user experience for someone like BT?
I think if you look at my customer's customer in terms of the DWP, and there's 20 million customers, and the demographic is very interesting. They're typically socially deprived, but every single one of them has access to a phone, whether that be a mobile phone or a fixed land phone. So we are absolutely trying to drive voice into our platform as a regular way of interacting, whether that be in natural language, whether it be constrained speech, and starting to drive kind of savings for the customer around self-service, but also starting to push them, where appropriate, onto other primary channels, likes of the web channel, and starting to integrate some of the social media channels with the whole objective around avoidable contact. So very much see speech and voice for the DWP as a complementary way to the digital by default, web channel, and making fairly major investments to grow that capability in the platform.
Right. What about at WebRTC? All right, we had some discussions about that yesterday. Some of the speakers this morning brought up WebRTC, and when we think about the user experience, does WebRTC start playing a role, in your space? And maybe Michael, I'll talk with you. I mean, is this even something that is a discussion at Frontier?
Yeah, so I think it does, but if I go back kind of to your, just back up a little bit, when I look at this, it really for us is going to require a new business model. So, earlier this morning we had a group that got together and we were talking about, with these applications, what application is going to work the best? Which one's going to take off? Which one will sell? Which market segment do we target to? So maybe the business model is starting out as a hosting model with someone like GENBAND hosting that for us until we build up, enough customers that can then take it forward. Because I think the applications, guessing which ones are going to be winners and losers is really tough to do. But if we've got an easy way to test them in the marketplace and then, follow up on obviously the ones that take off and be able to discard the ones that don't. But it's going to take a different kind of business model for us. And, one of the presenters earlier talked about, buying it or, outsourcing, and to think that we would outsource our voice application, if you asked me that 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say you're crazy. But now I'm seriously thinking about how do I move this forward to outsource it, because I think that, mass and of customers together, we need to look at some thicker partnerships, as Andrew mentioned, to be able to get into that business and work it well. So I think, with mass and being able to provide those application developers with, an opportunity to make a couple bucks off an application, and if we maintain a solid core foundation of our network to carry those applications efficiently and effectively and securely, maybe that's our sweet spot as we go forward. So it's really rethinking the business model, I think, for me.
Right. I don't know if anyone else on the panel has some thoughts about where does WebRTC fit in your organization, or does it today?
I think that, when we're talking about innovation being so important, obviously WebRTC is a key there. I think, though, maybe it's missing one important part. If you think about it, there have only been two truly ubiquitous services, right? Telephone number and SMS. And carriers brought both of those services, right? And they have value because they're so ubiquitous. So I think there's also value at looking at other services that could be just as ubiquitous. And RCS was definitely, I think that's the intention. And so I'm also interested in looking to see where that's going to go and how that's going to play out.
Right, right.
I mean, I would just add that I think, WebRTC is actually going to be very important for carriers going forward. You look at, again, we learn from our children, and watch the adoption of things like FaceTime and these other over-the-top things, which are very simple to use. And I think the real jar for me was seeing my daughter try to call her grandmother, and my father-in-law answered, who's a complete technophobe, but nonetheless, happy that he retired before he had to learn voicemail. Nonetheless, he's able to interact with FaceTime and use it in a very simple way. And so, to the extent that becomes the adopted model, WebRTC is the way that carriers can really bring that back, can continue to own the customer, own the experience, and bring back the ubiquity as well. Because rather than let people migrate off to these sort of balkanized systems like Skype and FaceTime that particular vendors want to own.
Right. I'll leave everyone with a little bit of food for thought on this topic, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm looking at the clock here. Mark made a comment this morning that at World Congress, WebRTC wasn't a topic at all, and I would agree. It wasn't in any of my conversations when I was there. But at Enterprise Connect here in North America back in March, it was the main topic. So enterprises are very interested in WebRTC. So if you're not thinking about it and you have enterprise customers, you better start thinking about it, right? If you're a carrier or a vendor, because let me tell you, enterprises are moving fast on the education curve, trying to figure out what it means for their businesses. So consumers may be a totally different story, but on the enterprise side, they're all over it. So I think, in the next 2 years, you'll see a lot. And there are some enterprises that are really effectively using HTML5 WebRTC today. So if you're not thinking about it, get up to speed, right? That's my word of wisdom for you guys. So let's, in the last few minutes, just kind of wrap it up. And I had one thought that really came from listening to Balan from Liberty Global, and that was all around the cloud infrastructure. So I'm just going to kind of tie it all together in terms of, we talked about the core, the edge, and a little bit of the experience. And probably this is another topic that comes out a lot in terms of, can the infrastructure move to the cloud, right? What's your thought about moving that piece and bringing it back to, from a core perspective into the cloud? And I'm curious to see everyone's perspective of, what does that mean for your operation? Is it something that you're thinking about? Because I think the audience, there's a lot of people that are evaluating and think about that, and we'll just go down the row and we'll start with Andrew.
Yeah, to be totally honest, when I look at the challenges that we face today in a lot of discussions, from let's say a consumer voice perspective, maybe with some more of our strategic programs in the enterprise space, cloud may become very important. We haven't had a lot of discussions on the consumer side of the house, although we do realize that it opens up a lot of new opportunities. It makes us a little bit more flexible and agile, and quicker to market to provide newer services. So it may not be the first thing that we discuss, at least from a VoIP or especially on the consumer side, but it's definitely something in the roadmap that we're thinking about and realize that we need to talk seriously about.
Right, John.
Yeah, I don't know that we use the cloud in every sentence, and I think it's how you define that. But I do think from Frontier's perspective, the ability to aggregate applications or capacity at some central location, whether that cloud sits in an old central office that we've retrofitted, or whether it sits, in someone else's data center someplace, we have to be able to aggregate our capabilities and then be able to spread those, for our case, across 27 states. So I think everybody's facing that same challenge, because you can't build, the conversations I've had around this, you can't just take a DMS 100 and go out and replace one for one. You never get there. You just can't survive in that model. So we have to come up with a way of aggregating that, and if cloud's the right term, then I'm okay with that. But it means, cloud means a lot, different people interpret that many different ways. But for me, it means being able to aggregate capabilities in a central area that you can ubiquitously provide those across your network.
Right, yeah, I agree, Michael. Cloud is not necessarily always the right word, but Sean, to the same perspective.
I think I have maybe just a different perspective, which is one of the things we struggle with is jumping from the model where we're delivering the same service to millions of customers in the residential market to a model where you're dealing with enterprise customers. The volumes are a lot lower and the requirements are a lot more specific to market segments. And so this is an area where I see a cloud offering could be interesting for an operator of the size that we are, which is not an AT&T or a Verizon. So allowing us to maybe target specific enterprise segments at lower risk at the beginning seems something which could be compelling. So that would, from our perspective, I think that would be one of the first applications we would see.
Ian, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
I think if I took it from the perspective of my market in the UK, which is central government, they're really driving a PSN agenda, public services agenda. And really that's all about putting shared commodity-based services back into the cloud, however you badge it. And they really are starting to drive us around a utility-based model. It provides some challenges because they're typically OpEx models. So there's the old capital challenge of standing up the platform, making it available in a secure way, maybe via private cloud to multiple customers. But we definitely see the demand now for shared commodity services, even in government, driving up through WAN, voice, contact center, and other conferencing services, which personally I think is a very good thing, because it's making BT think in a different way of how we build these services, how we build these services, how we operate them. So yes, there's a drive.
And niche for yourself.
Yeah, I think this is a massive transformation opportunity. If you really believe in this notion of a migration from, robustness and scale to choice and flexibility, I think the thing that you need to guard against is the rising cost of OpEx as you get into different technologies, whether it's trying to make voice sexy again or other things. The transaction costs are going up. And the thing that cloud really delivers is a set of automation capabilities. And if you look at, for instance, the ratio of sysadmins to server ratios that exist in the industry, I've been the sysadmin for a small enterprise, and I'm about somewhere on the order of 50 or so servers to one sysadmin. That's probably about as much as I can accommodate. Some greater scale operators, maybe some of the folks on this panel may have operations that can scale up to 100 maybe to 1. But if you take a look at what Google and Azure are doing, it's 5,000, 10,000 to 1.
Right.
And so when you think of just the OpEx savings on being able to deploy applications, I think it's just such a transformation in terms of how you can compete at a service level when you migrate to cloud. So I think it's fundamental to the transformation of operators today.
And John, what you have the
I would
last
agree,
word.
and just add that the other advantage of heading that direction is an opportunity for carriers who were traditionally geographically bound to potentially start to offer services outside of their traditional footprint. Even I met one carrier here, it's quite small, Granite State Telecom, talking about going, now they got VoIP, they can go and go out of territory, and that gives them some additional segments to attack. So the cloud not only offers the operational savings, which I completely agree, but it expands the market opportunity and expands the things that a carrier can really offer. The challenge again for vendors is, it's not one size fits all. Not every carrier is going to want to go cloud, or maybe they don't want to go cloud now, they want to go cloud later. So it's one more thing that that we're taking into account as we design and develop our products, is to make sure that our products become cloud ready or cloud deployable, and we make effectively the same product that can integrate to the back office the same way, provide the service the same way, regardless of whether a carrier prefers to deploy it as a point solution or deploy it in the cloud.
Great. So I know we stand between you and lunch, and we've run over, the timer has gone off. So I want to thank the panelists. It was a really great discussion. And if you do have any questions for them, they're here at lunch, so maybe you can find them and ask your questions in private. So I want to thank everyone. So thank you.